Welcome everyone. For those who are in person, I'm glad to see you. For those who are just tuning in online, thanks for tuning in online. If you haven't seen the last two videos that we've done, we've been doing every video for this Genesis series, and we're posting it on our Onward YouTube channel, which you're probably on right now. If you haven't watched those two first videos, go check those out first, as they'll give us some context of what we're going to be diving into today. I miss all of you guys. If I haven't been able to see you, I hope you're well. I hope finals, if you have finals this week, are going well. I'll be praying for you guys this whole week. So if you have anything that you want prayer for, just let me know. I'll add it to my list. But I miss you guys and hope to see you soon. That said, let's dive into our series. We actually just in person watched a little video, about 5-minute video, that kind of gives us context of this whole passage and what we're going to be talking about today, because we're going to be covering a lot of ground in Genesis as we end today, the book of Genesis. So the lesson we're going to be looking up, or the video to look up, is on YouTube. It's called The Book of Genesis Part 2 by the Bible Project. It's a really great video. They cover a lot of the characters that we're going to be going through today as well. But I encourage you to go watch it. It will kind of give your brain in the right place to kind of get an idea of what we're going to be going through today. Once again, that's The Book of Genesis Part 2 by the Bible Project on YouTube. So pause this video, go watch that one about 5 minutes, and then come back here and we can really dive into what we're going to be talking about today. That said, now that you're back, think to yourself about someone famous who inspires you, some celebrity. Maybe that's someone who inspires your creativity. Maybe that's someone who inspires you to do a specific career. You're like, oh man, I want to do that now. Or maybe that's someone who just changes the way you think a little bit, makes it so that you think about things with more depth. That's cool. We actually don't use the word celebrity quite as often as we used to. We use the word influencer, and I really like that word because it really is accurate. What happens is these people have hundreds of thousands of followers for a reason. People are looking up to these people. People, you and I, are impacted by these people. They're influencing us. Followers is a great word because it really does sum up what we're doing. We're kind of looking up to these people as kind of like heroes that are impacting our lives, and that's amazing. But what if I told you that those people aren't true heroes? What if I told you that they are not perfect? Now, a lot of you guys would not be entirely surprised about that. You know that we all have flaws, we all have issues, and that doesn't exclude those celebrities, those influencers, those inspirational people. But that's not always how we look at the Bible. Oftentimes when we look at different books of the Bible, we kind of create pictures of those people are like the heroes of each story. The book of Job, well, Job's got to be the hero of the story. The book of Isaiah's got to be the hero of that story, and all of these different characters. And then we look at even things like Abraham that we talked about last week, Sarah that we talked about last week, Noah. Moving forward into the New Testament, where you're like, oh yeah, Mary and Joseph, they're the heroes of those stories. The 12 disciples, they've got to be the heroes of the stories. The reality is, God is using flawed, imperfect people to do some amazing stuff, but He's the hero of the story. God uses imperfect people for amazing, miraculous things. So today we'll look at 4 different people from the book of Genesis who are flawed. They didn't always make the good choices, but they played important roles in this massive story that is the Bible and all of creation. That said, let's start with Isaiah. I apologize. Let's start with Isaac. Sorry about that. Isaac, we find his story starts like we talked about last week with Abraham. Abraham had this promise given to him, and he was told, hey, this is gonna be a good thing. Like, you're gonna have a big family, even though you're really old. And this promise to you of a family, it's this line that's gonna be more than the stars in the sky, more than the grains of sand on the earth. You're gonna have a nation that will be looked up to by other nations, and you'll be able to bless other nations. So that was the promise, the covenant that they gave to Abraham, like we talked about last week. And Isaac was a fulfillment of that prophecy, of that promise. And Isaac was the son of Abraham. That said, we pick up in Genesis 26, where God is reaffirming that same promise to Isaac, saying, hey, this is what I told Abraham, and I'm going to tell it to you too. This promise is continuing on. So in Genesis 26, we're going to start in verse 3, go through verse 11, and then also 23 through 25. It reads, reside in this land as an alien, and I will be with you and bless you. For to you and to your descendants I will give all these lands. I will fulfill the oath that I swore to your father Abraham. I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven, and will give to your offspring all of these lands. And all the nations of the earth shall gain blessing for themselves through your offspring. Because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. So once again, God's reaffirming that promise to Isaac that he gave to Abraham. One verse later, though, we see the flawed nature. And what you're gonna see the theme of these characters is we're not gonna highlight them the way that we typically highlight the characters of the book of the Bible. We're gonna highlight them as in realizing that they're flawed. Let's highlight those flaws right now. It's not difficult to do. Literally a verse later after this promise, this grand promise. So Isaac settled in Gerar. When the men of the place asked him about his wife, he said, oh, she's my sister. For he was afraid to say, my wife, thinking, or else the men of the place might kill me for the sake of Rebekah, his wife, because she is attractive in appearance. When Isaac had been there a long time, King Abimelech of the Philistines looked out of the window and saw him fondling his wife Rebekah. So Abimelech called for Isaac and said, so she is your wife. Why then did you say, she is my sister? Isaac said to him, because I thought I might die because of her. Abimelech said, what is this you have done to us? One of the people might have easily have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us. So Abimelech warned all the people, saying, whoever touches this man or his wife shall be put to death. So immediately after this promise, Isaac lies in fear. He's afraid that he's going to die. And it's ironic because he doesn't have any children up to this point. So if God's promise truly is going to be fulfilled, it will be fulfilled. And Isaac's not going to die, but he's more afraid for his life than trusting what God actually told him was going to happen. And then more so, God says, hey, you're going to be blessing all these nations. What Isaac's doing here is actually what Abimelech is saying in his words is, you would have brought guilt upon us. You're actually doing the opposite of what God intended that promise to be for. You're here to bless other nations, not just bring them down like Isaac's doing. Isaac fails immediately following the promise, following this massive gift that God has given. What is God's response? From there he went up to Beersheba, and that very night the Lord appeared to him and said, I am the God of your father, Abraham. Do not be afraid, for I am with you and will bless you and will make your offspring numerous. for my servant Abraham's sake." So he built an altar there, called on the name of the Lord, and pitched his tent there. And there Isaac's servants dug a well. God looked back at all of the things that Isaac had just done, and instead of repealing that promise, repealing that blessing, he says, "I still care about you. I know you're flawed. I know you're making mistakes. I know you were so afraid that you didn't trust me. But I will still bless you because I am God and because I care and love for you and all of the people of the world." Literally 2 verses after being told all these blessings are coming, he let fear seep in. Though Isaac didn't trust God, God never gave up on him and never gave up on his covenant or promise that he gave with Isaac. He remained faithful even though Isaac failed. Sometimes we do some not so smart things in life. In Isaac's case, he lied because he was afraid, and even though he didn't need to lie or be afraid, here's the good news. God didn't give up on Isaac. God still keeps the covenant with him that he had made with Abraham. And even when we lie or make bad choices, God doesn't give up on us either. God gives us the chance to make things right and get back on track and follow Jesus. This takes us to our next group of people, and that's Rebekah, Isaac's wife, and Jacob. The family drama continues. We see in Genesis 27 a story about Jacob. Isaac had 2 sons. He had Esau and Jacob. Esau was the firstborn, Jacob was the secondborn. If you were the firstborn in that society, you got all of the family giftings, the blessings, your birthright, and the blessing from your family entitled you to what your family had. And in this case, Isaac would have had a good chunk of stuff. He would have had land, he would have had cattle, he would have had places, servants to help him, and that was all being given to Esau, not Jacob. But we see Esau is a little impulsive and dysfunctional in and of himself. At one point, he basically comes in, he's like, "I'm so starving, I am going to die." And he's being a little dramatic. He probably was not going to die. And Jacob just happens to be making soup at that point. And he's like, "Give me that soup, that stew, and I will give you my birthright." That doesn't seem like a fair deal, but Jacob's like, "All right, I'll do it. That sounds great to me." And Jacob takes Esau's birthright, which is that first element of being a firstborn versus the secondborn. It continues. Not just Jacob, that wasn't enough for Jacob. Jacob wanted all of those rights. And Rebekah actually had a favorite of her 2 children. Some of you guys are like, "Oh yeah, I don't have a favorite." Or your parents will say, "Oh, I don't have a favorite child." They're lying. They have a favorite child. It's probably you. If you're the only child, you should hopefully be the favorite child, but maybe that's not always accurate. But here, Rebekah has a favorite child, and it's Jacob. And she actually creates a plan with Jacob to steal the blessing Isaac has for Esau as the firstborn. And the plan involves taking advantage of Isaac, a blind old man he's having a hard time figuring out who's who, what's what. So he basically disguises himself to make it seem like he's Esau, and then Isaac gives the blessing instead of to Esau, to Jacob. So it works. But like any good plan, when it works, it doesn't necessarily mean that all of the drama goes away. Esau finds out, obviously, and he is like, I'm going to kill you. Like he's so angry that Jacob has taken everything from him. And so Jacob flees away and runs away from home to say, hey, like, I can't be killed. I don't want to lose everything. I just attained. Throughout the rest of the story with Jacob, he actually learns his mistakes. He learns what he had done is wrong. So he goes back to Esau, assuming that Esau will take him in as a servant, assuming that maybe Esau won't kill him, but hopefully he won't kill him. Esau forgives him, and there's some resolution in this story a bit, but there's still so much dysfunction. And maybe there's a lot of dysfunction in your family. In the midst of all of these family issues and feuding, here's something to know. God doesn't retract his blessing or promise upon his family. Though my idea of justice would be, hey, they don't deserve this promise anymore. This is a family. You saying that the world is going to be blessed by this family? Find another family that's less dysfunctional, because it's probably not that difficult up to this point. They have issues, but God doesn't abandon them. God doesn't change his promise or move that promise to someone else who is more deserving. The last detail that's interesting in this story is how like we talked about last week with Abraham, God changing Abram's name to Abraham, or Sarai's name to Sarah. God does that with an intentionality and a purpose and a promise involved in it. And we see that again here. And just kind of a reminder for us that God is God and he has all the control. God changes Jacob's name to Israel. Now that's probably a name that you are more familiar with, even if you're not familiar with the story of Jacob and Esau. Israel is a nation that still stands today. Now it probably looks very different than it used to, but God did build a people. God did establish a nation that is going on in many ways over all of these generations that it has existed, over thousands of years that has existed. The amount of people that they've been able to bless is probably numerous. No one has a perfect family, but this family seems a little extra dysfunctional, right? God didn't give up on them. Think about God's faithfulness towards this family. Maybe be praying for the dysfunction within your own family and recognizing that God can heal that dysfunction just as much as he healed this dysfunction and turn it into something beautiful. On the other side of it, have you ever seen manipulation damage families and friendships? God can heal that. Maybe you have a family member who doesn't believe in God or is living a destructive life. I encourage you to keep in mind that God is not going to abandon them. God is not going to abandon your family just from the things that we do. Because we're not perfect. We know that. But God keeps his promises, and God continues to take care of us. Maybe not always in the way we would want, maybe the way we write it all up, but God is faithful. The last person we're going to talk about is Joseph. In many ways, Joseph is a fulfillment of some of these promises, but obviously the fulfillment continues past Joseph as well. Joseph we see his story kind of takes up actually a good chunk at the end of the book of Genesis. He starts probably around Genesis 36 and 37, and then finishes all the way through chapter 50. So if you're looking for a good long read, Joseph's story is for you. Joseph's story is, Joseph is the son of Jacob, the one we just talked about. He's the 11th son. At the time of most of the story, he is the youngest, and he's the favorite. Picked up some of that from his mom. Being in a big family and being the favorite is probably not always the best idea, but it is what it is. So he actually has this dream too, where he comes up and he's like, hey, so I just had this dream, and I think it's from God, that I'm gonna be in charge of all of you. And actually at some point you guys will all bow down to me. Maybe you have siblings, maybe you don't. But imagine walking up to your sibling and saying like, yeah, I just had a dream that like you're gonna worship me, and yeah. That sounds cool, right? Your sibling probably wouldn't take that too lightly, or they wouldn't enjoy the story quite as much as you would. And in fact, Joseph's brothers are so annoyed and kind of jealous with how Joseph is treated that they devise a plan to like, we're gonna kill him. We don't like him. We don't want him here. There's a lot of killing a lot of people who want to kill in the book of Genesis, because apparently that's like the go-to. It's not encouraged in the Bible at any point in time, but it's what we as people think is a solution. It's not a solution. Don't kill. That said, they choose to, instead of killing him, they're like, actually, we could probably make some money off of him. So they sell him into slavery instead, which is, once again, God protecting the promise, God protecting Joseph. And so, after a series of events, both good and bad, Joseph is sold into slavery into Egypt, and throughout all these different processes, even being thrown into prison and telling some more prophecies about dreams at prison, he actually gets brought before the king and tells him about this dream, and actually explains the dream that Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, that you maybe even read about in history books, has said that I had a dream, and it was basically telling them, you're going to have 7 years of plentiful harvest, so much food you don't know what to do with. And then you're going to have 7 years of drought, 7 years of famine. There's not going to be anything for you to eat. If that's the case, what we need to do is we need to save during the 7 years of feasting and for the years of drought in the area. This is part of the way that God is providing for that promise of Abraham's family blessing other nations, because this didn't just happen to Egypt. This happened to all of the areas around them. And so the king is so pleased with Joseph that he raises him up to the second in command of Egypt, this massive, massive nation. And what happens is he basically says, all of these other nations, we have actually so much food that we can take care of Egypt, but we're also going to be able to bless other nations. So who does that include? Well, that includes Jacob and all of his family. They have no food, so they go to Egypt to find food. Who do they meet? They meet Joseph. Now, at first, they don't really recognize Joseph, because last time they saw Joseph, the brothers saw Joseph, he was like dying in a hole, and now he is like raised up like a king in all of his Egyptian garb. Joseph just looks at his brothers, and his brothers are so afraid of what's about to happen. They're so afraid that when they finally find out that this is Joseph, and they hear about the journey that Joseph has been on, they're afraid of what's going to happen. They're afraid of who is going, what he can do, because he has so much power. But Joseph's response is not a response of anger. It's not a response of throw them into prison like I would want. Joseph's response kind of sums up the whole book of Genesis on the fact that he is not the hero, the fact that we aren't the heroes, the fact that we don't have the control or power, even if you're in a high position of power like he was. God is in charge. God is the hero. So here's what Joseph says. I think it's a really good summation of what we've been talking about in the book of Genesis. But Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? Even though you intended to do harm to me, God intended it for good, in order to preserve a numerous people as he is doing today. So have no fear. I myself will provide for you and your little ones. In this way, he reassured them, speaking kindly to them. Joseph is saying, hey, God's in charge. We're making messes all the time. We are creating havoc. We are making things way worse. But God can take that mess and turn it into something beautiful. Think about a time jealousy hurt a relationship you have. Now think, if you're a flawed being, did you have some part to play in that as well? Even when we meet our first near perfect character like Joseph, at least, not the scumbag that a lot of these other characters are, we are immediately reminded that God is the hero of the story. When these people did their best to screw up God's plans and promises, God simply looked back and said, I will use this for something beautiful. Looking back to the beginning, back in Genesis 1, where he said that everything after he created creation was good, God looked back and said, you're going to mess some stuff up. And that's what happened from Genesis 2 on. We are messing things up. We are taking what was beautiful and twisting it and creating issues and sin and flaws and devastation. There's murder in the world. There's theft and abuse. All of these things. We're constantly making a mess of things. But God is working through those messes to create something beautiful, something that goes back to Genesis 1 is very good. He's working overtime to turn what our messes are into something beautiful. That is so cool. So I leave with a couple questions to think about in your life. Think about a time you saw an ordinary person do something extraordinary for Jesus. Tonight we talked about the ways fear, manipulation, and jealousy can hurt us. Ask yourself, am I struggling with any of those three? Go to God with those struggles. Whose Bible story from today's conversation do you find most encouraging or most relatable? How does understanding that we are flawed, ordinary people help us rely more on Jesus and not ourselves? And lastly, what fears do you need to bring to Jesus to help you to have him help you handle it right now? What do you need to bring Jesus to take care of instead of us, who are flawed characters, people who are going to mess things up? With that, let's close in prayer.